Welkom. De Stripdagen Haarlem. Ik begin even in het Nederlands. I'll start in Dutch. I'll skip the French and we'll continue in English.
Okay.
Stripdagen Haarlem, wereldbouwers, builders of their own worlds. And one of the sub-themes, of course, is biography in the graphic novel or in cartoon culture or in, how shall we call it, drawn biography. Maybe I could say that.
We keep silent.
Yes, that's
That's quite judgmental. Huh?
It's all up to the audience.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. My name is Louis Pirenne. I am a Haarlemmer and I am a lover of the strip cultuur, strip lover. Strip is strange in English. Strip club. We're in a strip club now.
Okay.
In Canada, that might be something completely different. Let me introduce Philippe Girard from Quebec, one of the keynote guests from abroad, from overseas in this case. And we will talk about his work, which is a lot more than just the very famous Leonard Cohen biography. But of course we will focus on the biography as well, called On a Wire. And I have it here. And Typex, more Amsterdammer than any other Amsterdammer I've ever met, I believe, is sitting there.
Amsterdamist.
The Amsterdamist, yeah. Amsterdammed, exactly. And these two people are, I think, a legend in their own world because of these two biographies. And as I already said, both artists produced a lot more than the work we will focus on now. We'll come back to that a bit later. But this is what made them famous, also in our country. Philippe, maybe you would like to introduce yourself also as an addition to what I said.
Yeah, well, I don't know what else to say.
No.
I was born in Quebec City. I still live there. So I live in the French part of Canada. French is my first language. I've done 20-something books of comics. I've written novels as well, kid novels and novels, real novels, like my mom would like to say. And but I mean, comics is my really, it's my field of work. I identify myself with comics. And yes.
Did you say comist?
No, comics.
I did it myself. As a comist, no. As a writer, as a producer of comics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, I guess that's it. Pretty much.
Good. Typex, could you introduce yourself a little bit more?
More than he did. I'm afraid I'm going to tell the same story. I also identify with comics. I'm a comic artist, as we just decided. And that is my starting point. From there on, I do a lot of illustrations and also what some people call fine art, because it's too big to fit in a book. And yeah, I come from Amsterdam, as you just said.
Very much so,
says it all.
I believe.
Yeah.
Born and bred.
Yes.
Yeah. The books we will start with, of course, are similar, but also on the other hand could not be more different. Here we have On the Wire, the quite compact biography of Leonard Cohen. And here we have something completely different. This is a book like a brick. It's called De Vele Levens van Andy Warhol, The Many Lives of Andy Warhol. And what brings these two books together is the fact that we talk about two world-famous men with legendary lives, filled with contrasts, filled with mysteries, filled with the forming of legends, and actually two very complicated men. I must say that. I see you nod, the both of you. As Warhol as well as Cohen, I'm a fan of both, which is a coincidence, a happy coincidence. They are both very, very complicated men. Now, how do you analyze the lives of these men? And let me start to ask the question to you. The complex and mysterious life, full of paradoxes sometimes, of Leonard Cohen. How do you work your way through the material to make it biographical material?
It was quite a challenge, I must say, because when he died, I thought that I knew everything about him. Then I went to the public library and I took all the books and magazines available and I read everything. And I noticed, like in the first day, that there was so many things that I didn't know about him. So I took notes, and suddenly it started piling up on my drawing table. So after a few months, I had all this documentation everywhere around me, plus the music and the novels and the poetry and everything. And Leonard Cohen himself said, I lived 1,000 lives. And it became quite obvious to me quickly in the process that I couldn't tell 1,000 lives in one book. You need to make choices, otherwise it's not interesting. So I didn't know where to begin. So I drew a Star of David on a piece of paper, because Leonard Cohen was Jewish. And in the middle of the Star of David, I wrote Leonard Cohen's death. And for each tip of the star, I decided that I would focus on a decade. So the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the year 2000. And for each decade, I would focus on one woman, one song, and one object. So we start by Leonard's death, focus on one decade, go back to his death, then the next decade, etc. So the book started building himself through that structure. And of course, I had to leave stuff. I left so much stuff that I could probably make another book about Leonard Cohen with all the stuff that I left behind.
Yeah.
But in the end, I'm talking about the resilient Leonard Cohen, the man who had to reinvent himself throughout his life. And that is the main focus that I had in mind when I started working on the book.
But as if you were a dramatologist or a scriptwriter for someone who works a book into a film script, which means making choices. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting that you start building a structure to find your way through the jungle of his life.
I always start by the structure.
Interesting.
Some people see it as constraint, and it might look at something that deprives me of creative liberty, but it's not the case. When you have a structure,
it's the structure that liberates creativity.
It gives the energy to the book. Yes,
all right,
absolutely.
All right. Now I'm really curious, Typex, how that worked in your case when we talk about this brick, about Warhol's life, Warhol's many, many lives. Which is a parallel, of course, between the two personalities who led more than one life in a way. You were not looking for, is my impression, correct me if I'm wrong, for limitation. You seem to have concentrated on completeness, or not?
It could have been four times as big than it already is. When I do biography, which I won't never do again, but I tell that every time.
I'll come back to that later.
I try to make it a real story. I don't want to be hampered by all the facts, though I do use them. And just as Philippe, of course, we need a structure before you, especially if it's such a big project. But I not only, there were two main focuses. Because with all the material I read about Andy, at a certain point, and there's such an abundance. It's a library full, and then all the filmed material and recorded, mostly by himself also. But all the biographical stuff. At a certain point, I had the impression, do I even like this man remotely? Because I had the impression they were all very colored and very, in the end, rather negative. And if
image-wise, you mean?
Yeah, the image of his character. I mean, of his character, not of his product.
Yeah.
And that began to bother me because I also saw this is going to take me a long time.
A few years of your life.
I didn't know 5 years, of course, but.
Yeah.
And am I going to live with somebody I basically don't like? So I try to find something, a cue, where I would feel for him or sympathize or whatever. And then finally I read his diaries, which are now a Netflix series.
Yeah.
And those diaries were the first time I got a sort of a look inside of his head, and these diaries aren't really diaries. It's a spoken describing of his day. Every day
He had a little recorder with him all the time?
No, he phoned his secretary, and she wrote it down. So it's still a bit interpretive, but not. It's the closest you can get, I think, to Andy. And then I thought, but then I saw because it's 800 pages, I think, of nothing. There's nothing happening. There's only gossip and sides. There's nothing interesting in there, but you get a feeling of him, and especially of his sense of humor. And I saw, for the first time, I had to think, this is a guy I wouldn't want to spend my life with, but we could have a good night on the town together, and that would be a lot of fun. And I started to feel for him.
Okay, yeah, my question was that if the diaries, amongst this ocean of material, gave you the clue to sort of start liking him a little bit.
No, a lot, actually.
A lot.
You don't, to like somebody who is always nice and always, sociable, whatever, that's easy. That's monkey's love. But, a true love is to love someone with his flaws and whatever, the complete character. Yeah. And then but the other object I also had with the book was it's also a history of pop culture from the 1930s up till the late 1980s. Yeah. So it's all about music and art and film and everything.
Yeah, definitely. I happen to be, it took me some time when I talk about Leonard Cohen, but I happen to be a fan now of both artistic gentlemen. Philippe, do you have to be a fan of, in this case, Cohen? Or is fascination enough to become a good biographer?
I'm not his biographer, that's for sure. Even after finishing his book, I knew that I wasn't his biographer because I told the tale of my Leonard Cohen.
You are right.
The one that I love, and for reasons that are mine only.
I won't use the word anymore, but you're right. Yeah.
And so that's first thing. Then, do you have to be fascinated? I suppose that it helps because, as Typex just said, you're not going to invest 2 years of your life in a project in which you are unhappy or of someone you despise. Or well, if you do, then you have lots of hatred in you. And I mean, I couldn't burn lots of energy on hatred, frankly. I really loved Leonard Cohen, and I still love him after making that book. The difference is that now I feel like I'm his friend, because we spent so much time together in my head, and we've had so many imaginary discussions, him and me, that I was drawing the panels, on my drawing table, and I was picturing him sitting next to me and saying, Philippe, we have such a nice time together, and stuff like that. So that's what's changed. But it's not fascination, it's friendship. Now it's friendship. And it's friendship for the Leonard Cohen that I invented, and I just gave him a bit more substance in those 2 years. But he's still an imaginary Leonard Cohen, if you like.
Very interesting, like an imaginary friend, but a friend who exists.
He is an imaginary friend, but he's my friend up to the point that I'm keeping stuff from the readers, stuff that I discovered by reading and thinking about him. So that's what friend does, and friends will always help each other, and they will take a bullet for each other. So that's what I'm doing with him.
Yes, and a friend would, if he knew a little secret, a little nasty secret, he wouldn't tell. He wouldn't spread the word.
Yeah, he'd die with it.
Okay, usually that's the task when you make something biographical of the widow. The big law behind writing a novel is kill the widow first. Because she will keep the nasty shit away from you or be in there for the money. I like that expression, kill the widow first. But
Leonard Cohen had so many wives, mistresses, that there would be lots of people to kill, so... in my case, it's not about that. It's just that I liked him. He helped me go through my teenage years because of his music, basically. And in the end, making this book helped me move on in my adulthood, if you want. it's different. It's a different relationship,
Yeah.
but it grew up from the same friendship.
Yes.
And that's it. Now, is this fascination? Again, I don't think so.
Friendship is surprising, a very interesting way of looking at the subject. You are, and he was, you were both Canadian. Did you ever meet him? Did you ever attend a concert?
Yeah, I've seen him in concert, but I didn't properly meet him. Once, when I was 18 years old, I was walking in the streets of Montreal with my cousin. And I live in Quebec City, which is 200 kilometers east of Montreal, where nobody speaks English. So Leonard Cohen was from Montreal, from the English part of the city. And when I was in Montreal back then, I was convinced that every star of the city was always under disguise, with a fake hat and fake mustache and fake glasses. So I was always looking at people in a way, to see beneath the disguise. So I was with my cousin on the sidewalk, and he said, "Hey, we just walked by Leonard Cohen." And I said, what was he disguised as? And he said, "Well, nothing special, as Leonard Cohen." So I missed him. But then again, I saw him once on a terrace, far away, but he was having a coffee, in front of the restaurant. And friends of mine saw him in the metro and buying a pack of cigarettes. So that's the kind of guy that he was. And everybody knew which house was his.
Yeah.
It was, it's a normal Montreal house with a park in the front. And he had the only washing machine of the neighborhood, so all the neighbors would come to his place to wash their clothes. And he was a really simple guy. But I never saw him.
Partly.
What?
He was a really simple guy, you said?
I
said partly, reading the book.
Yeah, he was a party animal, that's for sure. But
No, I don't mean party. Partly.
Oh.
He was only partly a simple man, as you described him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I didn't get the chance to meet him as his real self, if you want. I saw him on a stage giving a show.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I made the book, because in 2012 he had to make a comeback because he was ruined.
Yeah.
His agent had spent all his money.
His agent and former lover
Exactly.
had spent all his money.
So,
well, there we have a drama.
He went to Quebec City, which is not his
Home
usual crowd, and after 3 songs he stopped the show and said, "If I knew that you liked me that much, I would have come sooner." And he repeated that 3 days later in another city, 100 kilometers north of Quebec City, where nobody speaks English. And then I thought, gee, maybe this guy suffered from sort of lack of affection in his own, country. And that's something that really hit me, because I thought, gee, this guy is like the best ambassador that we've had. And he put Montreal into the imaginary world, universal world of arts.
Yeah.
And he's revealing to us at the end of his life that maybe we didn't like him enough.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I made the book. I thought maybe I can give him back a bit of the love that he missed.
Yeah. Did you, Typex, get as close to Andy as Philippe came to Cohen? Would you be able to describe your relationship with Andy as friendship?
I'm very conscious of the fact that it's my imaginary friend also.
All right.
That I made him up along the facts and the things I learned about him. So, but apart from that, I totally agree with Philippe on that it has to become, well, a friend. I wouldn't keep things away, no nasty parts or whatever, because my biggest friend is a story. I want it to be a good story, and I want the people to decide or the reader to decide for themselves whether they like him or not. I definitely do, and I can take a lot from friends, even their nasty parts. But I know a lot of people don't. So you get mixed reactions.
Yes.
Some people think, they say, what a gigantic bastard, what a selfish. And other people say, oh, he's so endearing, and the way he loved his mother, and
he kept going to the Catholic Church every Sunday and stayed religious.
But he was not socially, he was very inept.
Yes.
And somebody who's always in social circles, that is
it's
extraordinary thing, of course.
It's an amazing paradox in his life. Yeah.
That he's totally only paradoxes. For every good part, there's a bad part, and that's how he's put together.
Yeah. When you listen to Philippe and the way he, if I may say so, almost deconstructed the life of Leonard Cohen on the hand of a schedule, the David Star, and really cut away a lot of the non-essentials. And my impression of the Warhol biography is that you definitely did not make that choice. Could you imagine that you do make such a choice? Because you, for example, let's broaden the horizon a bit, you also made quite a beautiful Rembrandt, if I may use the word biography, commissioned by the Rijksmuseum, and recently, we'll talk about it later, a biographical book, comic, about Moshe Mendelssohn, a very, very unusual and interesting Jewish philosopher from the 18th century Germany. Those books are smaller. They have more the size of On a Wire, and they couldn't be compared to the completeness of the Warhol biography. So could you explain something about the differences? Because these are two working styles.
The main difference is, of course, that the other two books were commissioned.
Yeah.
The most Mendelssohn was commissioned by the Jewish Museum in Berlin. And after I did Rembrandt, which was my first international book, which was translated and distributed in a great amount of countries, I was advised to do another biography about an artist, and then that was the point where I could choose myself. So I chose for Warhol, but not only because of his art, but also because one of the main points was his involvement with the Velvet Underground, which are my favorite band ever. And
mine as well.
Yeah.
Mine almost as well. Top 3, top 4 in my case.
Maybe because they are the best band in the world, could be.
Yeah.
And David Bowie and all the people who were around him made the book extra special for me.
Yes.
And also it gave me the chance to do something with different styles and to go into different eras. So it was a whole cornucopia of things I want to do, of things I love. Everything I love is in that book. All the culture I grew up with, all the pop culture, and I also grew up in the world of art.
Yes.
And so I could combine everything in this book.
I understand.
So it's a complete case.
So no limitations, because everything you wanted to pour out, you could pour out.
I'm not the best one for limitations anyway.
Okay. The interesting thing is, for example, that some personalities appear in both books. Nico, of course, the very famous German, singer, seducer of famous men, junkie, whatever. I love her voice and her accent. Nico is in both books. Lou Reed is very nicely, concretely drawn by you. The essentials of Lou Reed. You got them in your book. Of course, Lou is in your book as well. John Cale and the city of New York. And that's also very interesting. I mean, New York is, of course, the legendary image of the contemporary city, or maybe I would say 20th century city. And in both your books, New York plays a role. Mm-hmm. How do you draw New York, and how do you draw New York?
I go for the essence, because I'm not good at architecture or all that stuff. I'm not good at a lot of things. I do characters. I like the people in it and the city. I wouldn't call it a backdrop, but because I love New York, and there's a lot of New York in it also. Yes. The last chapter of my book is called New York, New York. And but the scenery is what it is. It's scenery with me, like.
What you say, that a theatrical term, of course.
Like a
backdrop,
scene,
yeah.
like a setup scene.
Yeah.
And before I started, I on the Dutch Literary Fund gave me the money to go to Pittsburgh and to New York, where I visited all the locations that would be in the book, and I spoke to a lot of people there, and it was very important for the whole spirit of the book. And for example, the things I do when I'm in New York studying Andy Warhol, I made the exact walk he did for his from his then house at that point
to the factory.
With his those locations are all gone. All the locations in Pittsburgh all is there, but New York is.
The factory doesn't exist anymore.
No, yeah. There's nothing. There's nothing. Even Studio 54 doesn't exist. It's all you have to refrain from that. But that's all sort of touristic for me. What I like to do is which way did he take when he walked his dogs? Because he walked his little dogs, which he truly loved, little dachshunds, teckeltjes. He walked them every day through the park. So I went to his last house, which was on the practically around the corner, and I thought, well, which way would he walk when he walked his little dogs? I even took photos from the dog's point of view, which I didn't use eventually because I thought maybe I'm going to do it all from the dog's, but that didn't work. But that sort of thing interests me more than something
pure,
like the factory.
Pure architecture or maps
to
of
be
cities.
at the place. I
Right.
look for the things people, only I would be interested in. So in Pittsburgh, I could go to his old school. I visited everything was still there, even his very first house he lived in. And I spoke to the janitor of his old school.
Yeah.
In New York, I talked to the person who's still having the cafe he also always used to come from back in the 50s, Serendipity 3. Same owner still, a man far in his 80s. I spoke to his nephew in Pittsburgh. I went to the church he went to with his mom in Pittsburgh as a child. I spoke to the Ruthenian community, and I have some friends still from there. So that's my way of, doing it.
Yes, but not in a documentary way, not making
No,
photographs
I make it
and bringing them
personal.
back in the drawings.
It's personal for me and for him.
I see.
So
Yeah.
that's the point of view I'm looking for.
What about you, Philippe? In your book, you have New York, but also, of course, the Greek island of Hydra, and some other places.
And Los Angeles and Montreal.
And Los Angeles, Montreal,
Yes.
Israel, even.
Yeah,
etc.
of course. I went everywhere.
Are these all backdrops?
I didn't go everywhere, so I haven't had the chance to go to Israel or to Hydra in Greece. But since I live close to New York City, of course, I went there. But the thing is, when you're a cartoonist and you have to draw New York City, on the first panel, you realize that you're not the first one to draw that city. Mm-hmm. Many people have drawn New York City in comics. Let's say Will Eisner, for instance, or almost
I can imagine
every
that.
comic, superhero comic book. Batman, Superman, name them, Spider-Man, they're all in New York. So, it's something, up to a certain point, you have to make the choice. You either use the city as a character or it's a backdrop.
Yes.
And you have to make a choice. That's one thing. The second thing is that when you draw comic books, I also draw characters. I'm like Typex, but you cannot avoid cars, streets, and buildings. And I don't know anybody who likes to draw them. It's
there are lots of people.
Yeah, lots of people, but I don't know them.
Joost Zwarte, our local hero here, one of the founders of the festival.
He made something of it.
But
he draws cars and buildings.
I know.
Yeah.
But since I'm not into that crowd, I asked my friends, how do you deal with, drawing buildings and cars? And they told me, just draw them and stop worrying about it. The essence of the place will define itself through your drawings. So that's the way I ended up doing it. But
that sounds like almost a subconscious process.
It is. I think it is.
I
think it is.
Yeah.
Because once you visited a place, if you draw it, something will come up from the inside, and go through the drawing. And I mean, if you like the place, the reader will see it. But if you don't like the place, readers will see it too. So that's the thing with me.
That's a nice one. That's a nice one.
But just for the sake of telling the anecdote, I had to draw Los Angeles as well because I wanted to show where he lived at the end of his life. So once I was in Los Angeles, in a hotel room, way before I did that book, I was wondering maybe George Harrison is in the phone directory. So I looked up. No George Harrison, no Tom Petty. I looked for everybody that I loved, and then I thought, hey, maybe Leonard Cohen is in the directory. Well, he was with his phone number. So I wrote down the address.
Oh, really?
But of course I didn't call him. I was too shy. But many years later, when I decided to make that book, I needed an image of his house in Los Angeles. So I Googled it, and Google Street View captured him in front of his house.
Him?
Sitting on a high chair with his cat. Yeah, he was there with his car and his cat and 2 chairs, and he was there, probably having a drink or something. So it was so striking to me again how special he was. Like, you wouldn't see David Bowie, on a high chair in front of his summer cottage, but you could see Leonard Cohen. So,
what does this say about the man?
It says that he was normal in a way, very normal.
Yeah.
He was like a normal superstar.
Yeah.
If that's such a thing exists.
Yeah. Yeah. I would also be interested, because we know that Typex, who is a Dutch hero, Amsterdam hero, has done a lot of work in pop illustrations, music illustrations, subculture, all kind of stuff. At the moment there is an exhibition on another place in Haarlem with work that I would never have expected from you, but absolutely fascinating, very dark, quite violent, ironical as well. So Typex is, I think, a devil's artist who has so many skills in his field. But we know you not as good as we know Typex, of course. We do know, I was told, we only know the Leonard Cohen biography, which is only a percentage of your work, that you published, let's focus on the comic work, on the cartoon work, a number more books. What is the central issue or the central approach of the other books we don't know? I wrote down a few names. I had the impression that some of the work is quite political. Not sure. Historic interest. Could you tell us a bit more about your other work which we don't know?
Death is at the center of my work. 16 years ago, my best friend died of cancer. And he was treated for a year in my city.
Treated for a year?
For cancer, yes, in a hospital. So every day for a year, I went to see him in the hospital. And when he died, death entered my imagination. And I thought it would last like a year or two and then go away. But it's not a topic that you can get rid of very easily. So ever since then, all of my books have been about death.
Yeah?
All of them. And so that's the centerpiece of my work. And I'd say, plus probably the notion of identity, which is something that really present again in my work. Because as a Quebecer, if you've been interested in the reality of Quebecers in Canada, identity is something that's a core of our preoccupations. Because some Quebecers want to separate from Canada because of the linguistic duality and stuff like that. So being a Quebecer is a constant questioning about who you are.
Yes.
And since I'm no different from the others, I keep asking myself as well. So these two things are at the core of my work. And now that I know that death isn't going to leave my imagination, I know as well that identity is there for a long time.
A question that you can expect now is, of course, does your work help you mastering death in your mind in an artistic way? Maybe you're not scared at all of death. Some people are.
It's not a matter of being scared. It's more a matter of questioning yourself about it. I mean, everybody knows that up to a certain, maybe tomorrow, maybe in 10 years, but up to a certain point, we're all going to die. So as an artist, and that's the reality for Leonard Cohen as well, we all deal with artistic deaths once in a while. People will say, He's a has-been now. So you have to reinvent yourself as an artist. That's why he's doing all the stuff that he does. Nobody can say that he's artistically dead because he'll bounce back from somewhere. So thinking about death and reflecting about death is mostly a reflection about your life as an artist. How can you stay alive longer than your own life?
Is it because of the hope, and in some cases it's true, of course, that the art will survive the artist? Not always. I mean, theater, when you're an actor, when the show is over, the artwork is over. I mean, the play survives, but not your performance.
The performance, yes, but I mean, something will last longer in the mind of the people who've been in touch with the art, whatever it is. So yes, that's something, but we live in a world where everything goes fast, where everything dies fast. Yeah. So that's part of the whole, equation.
Could you illustrate this, for example, with choosing one or two books from your oeuvre that we don't know yet, and explaining a little bit about it?
Yes, sure. There's one that I've done maybe 10 or 12 years ago. It's called Killing Velasquez. That's been translated in English as well. So it talks about...
Could you repeat it?
Killing Velasquez.
Velasquez,
Velasquez, the painter, the Spanish painter. It's, I have it here, as a matter of fact. And so it tells the tale of my encounter with a pedophile priest when I was a kid. So, so that's one of the things. One of the ones that I did recently is called the le couperet in French, which is like a big knife for chopping meat. So in French, we have lots of expressions to refer to the human body. So I regrouped all those expressions in a story. And my character is a man who wants to, he has a girlfriend and he wants to ask her, he wants to marry her. But every time he uses those parts of the body, he loses them. So it's a reflection about the importance of the body in seduction. And while I did that book, my girlfriend had a mastectomy. So it's a reflection, yes, about the importance of the human body in seduction. So that's why I say everything I do, it turns around death all the time.
Yes. That's a surprising theme.
I could tell that... I didn't choose them.
No,
I didn't choose them.
It shows you.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish, my stuff was about having fun and partying with my friends at the beach, but it's not the case, really.
Yeah.
But really, my themes chose me. I have to tell you, that's the real way to say it.
Maybe the last album Cohen brought out is, in my personal opinion, and I'm probably not the only one, it's the way he accepts and gives himself over to death, falling back to Jewish hymns, etc., going back to his roots, really.
He never gave up his roots. He was always an observant Jew.
He was playing around with a number of other roots.
Exactly.
I mean, he was maybe a Jewish man who didn't want to be Jewish but preferred Buddhism, or the other way around.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think he really was... he always said that he had a good religion, but he was obsessed by the notion of divine. So for him, the love of the divine was something so big and so wide and so interesting that he was willing to explore any path to go there. Yeah. But in the end, I'm pretty convinced, and I'm 100% convinced that he was a Jew and proud to be.
Yeah, there is a little parallel, of course, with your commissioned biography of Moshe Mendelssohn, a very clever, but also very unusual Jewish man in Germany in the late 18th century. Jewishness, Israel plays a role in your book, Jewishness as a theme in a comic novel. How did you, Amsterdam used to be a Jewish city, New York City used to be and still is a very Jewish city. Amsterdam used to be, we all know why it isn't anymore, but that's another story. How do you artistically work with the theme Jewish identity in your work and your work?
In general, you mean?
In general, definitely, but maybe also this commission at the Jewish Museum of Berlin.
Well, I always allow or favor all the identities of people, be it Jewish or black or white. And of course, this book centers on Jewishness and the whole. One of the themes of the book is definitely you couldn't call it racism, but is it a
Prejudices?
prejudice is a better
Yeah,
word.
it's not.
I think
It's. There is a lot of
the hardship you have,
give the answer.
and in this case, Moses wasn't just Jewish in a very difficult time for Jews. There's always a difficult time for Jews, of course, but this was exceptionally. And but he always was a little man with a big hunchback, and he had a lot of things working against him, and he sort of turned that around.
Yes.
And
he reached out.
And he
from his Jewish identity, he reached out to the ruling class, to the Protestants.
Yeah, but not in a way. He doesn't. How you call it? He doesn't preach.
No.
He leaves.
He doesn't convert.
He doesn't convert. That was the word I was looking for. He's not seeking other people, of course, and it's impossible because Jewish is something you are by birth, and although you can convey to the religion, of course, but that's an entirely different thing, and that's not any of his interests. He is far deeper, broader than that in his beliefs, and so Jewishness, his being a Jew is his starting point, but not his goal. I mean, his goal is much deeper and goes wider between all. Religion isn't something that stands in his way.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Could you say that from Cohen? That his Jewish identity, I'm not sure, it possibly also was a Jewish religion. There's two different things, of course. Did religion not stand in Leonard Cohen's way?
Well, probably because, he was so obsessed, again, by the notion of divine. But, I'm not Jewish, and I know very little about Jewishness, frankly. I'm not a religious person either, I'm not super interested in all this. I think there's one thing in my book that I remember thinking of when I was working on it. It's the fact that Jews were migrants. They moved from one place to another. And Leonard Cohen was moving a lot. From Montreal to New York, to London, then to Greece, and then to Los Angeles. He was always, then to France. He was always on the run. And somehow I think that was probably something that was inside of him because of his culture. Yeah.
Interesting. But the wandering Jew is, of course, an expression that
and it's a legend.
In your book as well, wandering, wandering around, changing scenery and staging,
But honestly, out from that, I'm not sure, I think if I say more, then I will, tonight in my hotel room, I will regret it because I will feel like I was clumsy. So, but that's pretty much what I can say about it.
Yeah. It's a very interesting parallel between the two books. And of course, I try to construct some of these parallels by calling Amsterdam a Jewish city, but it was, but of course, look at my notes.
We took you with your pants down, right?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, my wife is Jewish,
I know,
so my daughter is Jewish, and in my life, I'm a Catholic boy from the South originally. It is a team, and it's very complicated. It's very complicated. For example, when you're truly Jewish, but you're absolutely atheist, but you are Jewish. As Catholics, you're Catholic or not. It's a very interesting theme, also in my private life. We already said that when you talk about biographies, you must kill the widow first. Andy Warhol didn't have a widow, some heirs, and Cohen does or did. His son is still alive, his daughter is still alive. when we spoke each other very briefly yesterday, you said if I would have the intention to make another Leonard Cohen book, I wouldn't be allowed whatsoever to even quote one song line or one line of poetry from, well, that's sort of amazed me and didn't entertain me at all. Could you tell a bit more about it?
Yes, there's legal limitations when it comes to Leonard Cohen, because he was ripped off by his agent and gave away the rights for one of his songs while he was alive, Susan, which is one of his most famous songs. So he lost lots of money on his lifetime.
It's in your book.
Yeah, it's in the book.
A mistake or out of naivety or whatever.
In the case of Susan, I think it's probably out of naivety, absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
But he really was ripped off by his agent at the end of his life. That's why he had to come back on tour.
Thank God.
So yeah, you cannot, if you're a musician, if you want to record a Leonard Cohen song, you can. But you cannot have rights from it, like nothing. And so when I wrote my scenario and drew my storyboard, I had sequences where we saw Leonard Cohen playing his songs or thinking about the words of his songs.
Yeah.
And I had to cut that off from the book because legally it was too complicated. And it meant giving away my own rights on the book.
Do you have a bit of understanding for that, or did you find it very annoying? I have the tendency to find it annoying. Come on, there is an artist who will make a...
Yes, I know, but again, I work better with constraints. I mean, if the field is wide open, you hang yourself when you have too much rope. So from the moment I decide that there will be limits, even if those limits tend to narrow while I move ahead, things go better for me. So I don't know, I wish it was different, but that's the way it works for me.
You have accepted this as a fact in daily life.
Yeah, but also, making a book is solving problems. I mean, while you're in the process of doing your book, you're constantly solving problems. And they come from everywhere.
Yeah.
Be it like your arm suffers or your child is sick at school, so you have to keep them, and it's difficult to work. And then you have a flood in your basement, and it's always solving problems. And suddenly you realize in your scenario that a situation happens that you didn't plan. You're constantly solving problems. So for me, when this reality fell on me, I just said, all right, there's a new constraint, and we'll deal with it. And it will give energy to the book, and that's what it did.
That sounds practical.
I had to think...
And sportive, in a way.
Maybe, but frankly, it's such a tiny element in the whole process. You cannot focus on that kind of stuff, otherwise you won't do anything.
Yeah.
So, instead of imagining Leonard Cohen singing a song, which frankly isn't that interesting in a comic book, seeing the guy with his guitar singing the song, anybody can imagine that. Okay. You don't need to see that.
No.
But it's more interesting to show him in his underwear in his basement or in the living room, trying to find the words for his song and searching for the words. No, that's something that nobody has seen. So, it's the kind of solution that emerges when you have constraints and you have to deal with them.
Clear.
So for me, frankly, the publisher called me. I was at page 42. He called me and he said, Philippe, stop the press, stop everything. We have a problem. We cannot quote Leonard Cohen. And I said, all right, let's be creative. Yeah. That's it. I mean, we spoke for 2 minutes.
Right.
So
if you would call this, well, it's of course not censorship. It's the will of the people
censorship.
after. What about your experience at Typex on this team?
I think it's far worse.
Yeah.
Because there's no song you can just use, or if the rights are never, if there are no rights on the song, but that's hardly any song in the world. All the rights have been bought by big business corporations,
in the meantime,
and they have left the building a long time ago. They're not
even
the
Bob
property
Dylan,
of,
even
they're
Bruce
not the
Springsteen.
property of the heirs or whatever. And I had a lot of music in the book, and we had to, at a certain point, we came to this conclusion that every song would cost a lot of money. So my publisher, Custerman, bought a couple of songs, but there was a limit to it. We bought Baby Love from the Supremes, because that's really used, was very important for that scene. We couldn't put something else in it. But all the Velvet Underground songs we had to abandon. They bought I'll Be Your Mirror, because that's also a very important part in the book.
Yes.
And all the other songs, if you see, we could only use the title.
Yeah.
Because the title is rights free. So if in the first version you see the lyrics of Heroin, a song by the Velvets, and now it's 3 panels, and now it's heroin. So you have to be creative. And the most silly thing was when I used the lyrics of Walk on the Wild Side by Lou Reed, which is all about the factory and the scene, and everyone is in the book who's in the lyrics. So I really was keen on having that one. And Custerman had already bought it from the corporation that has the rights now. And they were supposed to show how it is used, and then they saw there were all drag queens and debauchery, and they immediately pulled back the song. So it appears they had never listened to those lyrics, and they were shocked by the content, and they didn't want to be associated with that. So I replaced it with do. And that was right free.
Yes. I also have la 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 la,
Yeah.
from one song, one Leonard Cohen song. And
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
it solved the problem.
Yeah.
But again, you have to be creative, and you were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you would have to choose a favorite work of Andy Warhol,
Oh, wow.
which would it be?
Wow. It would probably be the movies, because they're so strange and weird, and they were so shocking, and people hated them. And, and I think he really was into them. I mean, it's something about them that really speaks about Andy Warhol. Like the weirdness and the artsy part of them, I mean, if you want to test your friendship with someone, or say you have a new girlfriend and you want to make sure she loves you, show her an Andy Warhol movie and tell her that you love that movie. And then you'll see if she really loves you. But to me, I mean, of course I like the paintings, and
Yeah.
but I mean the movies. I think they're so transparent in a way about him. They speak so freely about what he liked, about his dreams,
Yeah.
and about the things that inspired him.
And you don't only mean the very small, short 60mm movies he made.
Absolutely
Treasures
not.
of Life. You
No,
mean
no,
his trash?
Absolutely, I'm speaking about the stuff
Oh,
that
wow.
nobody wants to see.
Yeah.
There's something about that,
They're
that,
in your face, to say the least. Those films, huh?
well,
Amongst other things.
gee, I remember there's one that I saw in a gallery once in New York City. I think it lasts 8 hours, and it's a lady, a beautiful girl sitting on a sofa, and she seems so bored. And she looks at the camera, and then, looks at her nails, and then sleeps, and then turns around. And, you see how bored she is. But, there's something about that that's so honest, in a way, about Andy Warhol.
Yeah.
He wanted so badly to be into movies that he was willing to go like deep into the art of movies to make his place in that industry.
Yeah. You like that answer, Typex?
I think his greatest works of art are some of his movies, yeah.
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 Now, what is my final question to you? And I was forbidden to ask this question to Philippe. We said yesterday. I said, what is the question you always get? And it's about his favorite Leonard Cohen song. So I'm going to ask you the question. What's your favorite Leonard Cohen song?
I have 2 albums, so I have to choose. I have one album, Death of a Ladies' Man.
Yes.
And it's
his worst album.
It's his worst album.
I want to make a special remark about that to finish it all off.
Yeah, and the other one is one of his very last albums, which I drew an illustration of. So that one I got for free. But I do like Leonard Cohen, by the way, but I'm not an expert.
Okay.
So, and I do like that album, Death of a Ladies' Man.
Yeah, me too.
And it's because of the contrast. It's a big orchestration
Yeah.
of small songs, and he sort of loses himself and swaggers like a drunk man through it. And that's the song I like the most, but I can't remember the name.
No.
The final song of that album, I think it is.
I will take down the freedom which I have as a presenter to speak the famous, not the famous last word, but the last words. And I was never a Leonard Cohen fan until I was way in my 40s and discovered how important and wonderful he was as an artist. And because I didn't like all his Susanna, famous Blue Raincoat, simply wasn't ready yet to like it. And on this Death of a Ladies' Man's album, I believe, there is a song called Don't Go Home With Your Heart On. Mm-hmm. And that's a very, very funny and tough song. Yeah. And that's always been my favorite until I opened up for Mr. Cohen. Now, thank you very much for this interview. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you.
Many nice parallels and contrasts between the two of you and the work. So, thank you.
Thank
U
you.
ook bedankt voor uw aandacht.
Thanks.
And thank you.